The night my family asked me to leave, the fork was still warm in my hand. Not metaphorically warm. Literally. Heat rising from mashed potatoes, gravy thickening as it cooled, the smell of roasted chicken hanging in the air like something heavy and unavoidable. The kind of smell that says this is a celebration, even when nothing feels celebratory at all. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should finish chewing before anyone said anything important. That seemed polite. That seemed like the kind of detail people later forget, and I didn't want to forget anything. Not this. Maybe it's better if you go, my sister said. Her voice was calm, almost bored, the tone people use when they're returning a sweater that didn't fit. My mother nodded before I could respond. Yes, I think so too. This just isn't working. No yelling, no slammed hands, no dramatic accusations, just words placed carefully on the table between the gravy boat and the bread basket, as if they belonged there. I looked at my daughter, 7 years old, sitting too straight, breaking her dinner roll into tiny pieces with meticulous focus. She was counting peas on her plate under her breath. 1, 2, 3. I recognized the behavior instantly. It was the same thing I used to do when I was her age, and the room felt unsafe, but no one had technically done anything wrong yet. Across the table, my sister's children were laughing loudly, kicking their chairs, talking over one another. One of them knocked over a glass of water. Nobody said a word. My mother just reached for a napkin and smiled indulgently. That was when it hit me, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with clarity. Some children are allowed to take up space. Others learn very early how not to. Say something, my sister added, still smiling. The smile was polished, practiced, the smile of someone who believed she was being reasonable. My father stared down at his plate like the potatoes might offer him a different life if he concentrated hard enough. He didn't look angry. He didn't look confused. He looked absent, as if he'd stepped slightly to the side of himself and decided to stay there. I swallowed. I could have begged. I knew exactly how. I had rehearsed that role my entire life. I could have explained that things had been hard lately, that I was doing my best, that my daughter was sensitive, that it was Christmas. Instead, I heard myself say, very quietly, "Okay." That seemed to surprise them. My sister's smile twitched. My mother straightened in her chair. They had expected resistance, emotion, maybe tears, maybe apologies. "Okay?" my mother repeated. "Yes," I said. "But before we go, you won't mind if I do one thing." I didn't wait for an answer. I stood up slowly, so as not to startle my daughter. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "can you grab your coat and your backpack? We're heading out." She slid out of her chair immediately. No questions, no hesitation, just relief, flickering across her face for a fraction of a second before she masked it with obedience. That moment hurt more than anything else that night. When she disappeared down the hallway, something shifted in the room. My sister crossed her arms. Her husband exhaled, the way people do when an unpleasant task is finally over. My mother pressed her lips together. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said. I smiled, not because I was happy, because I was done. I walked into the kitchen. The light there was harsher, less forgiving. Earlier that day, while everyone was busy setting the table and arranging decorations, I had placed 3 envelopes in the back of a cupboard behind the holiday platters. I took them out now, plain, white, thick paper, each one labeled in black ink. "Mom, Dad, Claire, what's that?" my sister asked sharply. "Don't tell me those are gifts," my mother said with a thin laugh. I didn't answer. I tore the first envelope straight down the middle. The sound was soft, but in that kitchen it landed like a gunshot. My mother's face drained of color. I tore the second. My father finally looked up. "Stop," my sister said. "What are you doing?" I tore the third. Slowly. Carefully. No hesitation. I laid the pieces on the counter in 3 neat piles and stepped back. The room went silent. Then everything broke at once. "Are you insane? Undo that. You're proving our point. Please wait." I didn't respond. I walked back into the hallway, took my daughter's hand, and led her out the front door. Cold air hit my lungs hard enough to make me gasp. Behind us, the door flew open. Footsteps, voices, panic where certainty had lived 5 minutes earlier. I didn't turn around. That night didn't begin with Christmas dinner. It began 35 years earlier, with a 6-year gap. My sister is older than me. 6 years older. Long enough to be adored first. Long enough to be remembered as the miracle child. Long enough that by the time I arrived, my role was already assigned. She was the one strangers complimented in grocery stores. I was the one holding the cart. She took ballet lessons. I was told to watch her while our mother ran errands. When she cried, the house stopped. When I cried, I was dramatic. I learned early that silence was praised as maturity, and need was punished as inconvenience. I learned to anticipate moods, to smooth edges, to disappear just enough to keep things calm. For a long time, I thought that was love. I didn't know it wasn't until I met my husband. He wasn't loud. He didn't perform kindness. He just noticed things, fixed things. On our third date, I told him a story about my sister and my mother, laughing as I always did, trying to make it sound normal. He didn't laugh. "That's not okay," he said. 4 words. That was all. But they rearranged something fundamental inside me. He died 7 years into our marriage. A workplace accident, the company called it. Later investigations would use a different word, preventable. After the funeral, life didn't pause. Bills arrived. Groceries still cost money. My daughter still needed bedtime stories and reassurance that the world wasn't about to collapse. I stopped sending money to my parents. Not out of anger, out of necessity. They noticed quickly. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone, was that something else was coming. Something slow, complicated, delayed by paperwork and lawyers and grief. By the time Christmas arrived, it had finally landed, and I had made a decision. 3 envelopes, 3 chances. A quiet offer of peace. They never saw it. All they saw was the version of me they had always known. The one who would swallow hurt to keep the table full. When they told me to leave, they weren't just ending dinner. They were ending the last lie I was willing to live. And I let them. I didn't drive far that night. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly, and my daughter was quiet in a way that scared me more than crying ever could. The kind of quiet where a child is listening to the world rearrange itself and trying to understand what rules just changed. "Where are we going?" she asked softly from the back seat. The question landed heavier than it should have, because I didn't have an answer yet. Home was 2 hours away. We'd planned to stay at my parents' house overnight. That was the whole point of coming early, of packing her little backpack with pajamas and a stuffed animal she pretended not to need anymore. I pulled into the first hotel I saw off the highway. Not a motel with flickering lights and stained carpet. A real hotel. Warm lobby. Soft lighting. A front desk clerk who smiled directly at my daughter and said, "Hi there," like she mattered. That alone almost broke me. We got a room with 2 beds. My daughter kicked off her shoes and climbed onto one like she'd been holding herself together all evening and could finally let go. I sat on the edge of the other bed and stared at my hands, trying to slow my breathing. Neither of us spoke for a full minute. Then she said, very matter-of-factly, "Grandma doesn't like me." My chest tightened. "That's not true," I started automatically, the reflex of a lifetime rising up before I could stop it. She shook her head. "She likes Claire's kids. She always hugs them first. She gives them better presents. 7-year-olds don't exaggerate about things like that. They observe. They collect data. They draw conclusions adults don't want to hear." I took her hand. "That's not because of you," I said carefully. "It's not your fault." She thought about that for a moment. "So I don't have to be quieter?" The question stunned me. "No," I said. My voice wobbled. "You never have to be quieter to make someone love you." She nodded, as if storing that information somewhere important, and then yawned. "Can we watch a movie?" We watched something cheerful and forgettable. We ate snacks from a vending machine. She laughed at the silly parts, and each time she did, I felt something loosen just a little inside my chest. My phone buzzed non-stop on the nightstand. I didn't look at it while she was awake. After she fell asleep, sprawled diagonally across the bed, clutching her stuffed animal like an anchor, I picked it up. Missed calls, messages, my mother, my father, my sister, her husband. I let it buzz once more before answering. "Where are you?" my mother asked immediately, her voice too bright, like someone forcing cheer through panic. "Are you safe? Is she okay?" I almost laughed. Now you ask. "We're fine," I said. "Please," she rushed on. "We didn't mean it. Emotions were high. You know how your sister gets." I closed my eyes. In the background, I could hear voices. My sister, sharp and urgent. My father, low and tense. "Put her on speaker," someone said. There was a pause. Then my father's voice came through. "This is ridiculous. Come back and fix this. Fix this." Like it was a broken ornament. Like it hadn't been deliberate. "You told us to leave," I said quietly. In front of my child. "We were upset," my mother insisted. "You're overreacting." That word. Overreacting. The old familiar hook, baited and ready. "No," I said. "I'm reacting appropriately," my sister cut in. "You can't just tear something like that up and walk away. You embarrassed everyone." There it was. Not concern. Not regret. Loss. "You still don't get it," I said. "And I'm not explaining it tonight. Undo it," my father said. "You can redo it. Whatever it was, we'll talk." I looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully for the first time all evening. "No," I said. "Good night." I ended the call and turned the phone face down. For the first time since my husband died, my mind felt strangely quiet. The envelopes I tore weren't dramatic gestures. They weren't revenge. They were contracts, unfinished ones. After my husband's accident, everything moved slowly. Investigations, lawyers, meetings that made my stomach twist. The company avoided responsibility until it couldn't anymore. Insurance delayed until paperwork stacked high enough to bury grief under bureaucracy. I hired someone to handle it because I couldn't carry all of it without collapsing. The settlement came through just before Christmas. A number so large it didn't feel real. A number that didn't bring relief so much as gravity. The first thought I had, because apparently I am committed to learning lessons the hardest way possible, was them. My parents were still working, still drowning in debt they never admitted out loud. My sister was always between opportunities. Her husband had a talent for turning other people's money into plans. I thought maybe this could fix things. Maybe money, wielded gently, could finally buy peace. So I prepared 3 offers. Enough to change their lives. Enough to free them from the quiet panic they lived with. I didn't announce it. I didn't brag. I hid the envelopes behind serving platters and told myself I was being careful, thoughtful. What I didn't account for was how little they had ever seen me as anything other than a resource. The days after Christmas were quiet. Too quiet. No messages. No apologies. No concern for my daughter. Then I opened social media. My sister had posted a photo of herself in my parents' living room, smiling in front of the tree, her husband beside her, my mother in the background holding a mug like she was starring in a holiday commercial. The caption was long. It talked about betrayal, about boundaries, about ungrateful people who take and take. Then she named me. She showed up looking for sympathy, my sister wrote. And when we finally set boundaries, she humiliated our parents and stormed out. Comments poured in. Relatives I barely knew weighed in confidently. Prayers, judgments, advice no one had been asked for. Then came the line that made my hands go cold. "And yes," she added. "Before anyone asks, she got a huge payout after her husband died and won't give her own family a penny." There it was. I hadn't just been ungrateful. I had been greedy, lucky, profiting from grief. My phone started ringing again almost immediately. I didn't answer. I made lunch. Helped my daughter with homework. Watched her color, head bent in concentration, completely unaware of the narrative being built around her mother. By evening, something in me shifted. Silence had never protected me. It had only made me easier to blame. I opened my bank app and scrolled back through years of transfers. Quiet monthly payments to my parents. Emergency help. Extra deposits after my sister bought something expensive. I took screenshots. Then I found my mother's old post from after my husband died. The one where she'd publicly praised herself for sending me a small amount of money, framing it like charity. I screenshot that too. I wrote one post. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just facts. I hit publish. Then I turned off my phone and sat beside my daughter on the couch while she watched cartoons. Within an hour, the story online started to change. Questions replaced condemnation. Silence replaced certainty. My sister's post was edited. Then edited again. Then deleted. The next morning, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my parents. My sister. Her husband standing behind them like a shadow. My mother held a cake. I opened the door just enough to stand between them and my home. "We just want to talk," my sister said, smiling a new smile. "The kind you wear when you want something." I looked down at my daughter's hand gripping my shirt. "No," I said. And for the first time in my life, that word didn't feel cruel. It felt like protection. I closed the door gently. Not slammed. Not dramatic. Just enough pressure for the latch to catch and for the sound to be unmistakable. Final. For a moment, no one moved on the other side. I imagined them standing there, cake sagging slightly in my mother's hands, my sister recalibrating her expression, her husband shifting his weight like a man waiting for instructions. Then the knocking started. Soft at first, then sharper. Then my mother's voice filtered through wood and distance. "Please," she called. "We're family." I rested my back against the door and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My legs felt hollow, like they'd finally given up holding me upright now that the adrenaline was gone. My daughter crouched beside me, her shoulder pressed into mine. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She just stayed. That night, after they finally left, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from my childhood that suddenly looked different under new light. Conversations I'd brushed off. Silences I'd mistaken for peace. The way my mother praised calmness but punished honesty. The way my father opted out by default. I thought about my husband. How he used to fix loose hinges and dripping faucets without saying a word. How he'd listen when I talked. Really listen. Like my words weren't interruptions but information. How, on our third date, he had looked at me with quiet seriousness and said, "That's not okay." No one had ever given me permission to think that before. In the weeks after Christmas, things settled into a strange rhythm. The online fallout burned hot and fast. A few relatives apologized privately. Others doubled down, offended that the narrative they'd chosen had been interrupted by evidence. My parents didn't post again. My sister stopped reaching out altogether. The silence this time felt different. It wasn't punishment. It was recalibration. I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood where no one knew my last name, where my daughter could ride her bike without someone commenting on who she resembled, where mornings came with sunlight instead of tension. We planted a tree in the backyard together. She named it after her dad. "Do you think it will remember him?" she asked. "I think it already does," I said. Some nights were still hard. Grief doesn't disappear just because money arrives. It doesn't respect boundaries. It shows up uninvited, usually when you're doing something ordinary. But the fear was gone. Bills got paid. Groceries were just groceries again. My daughter slept through the night. Safety, I learned, is quieter than chaos. It doesn't announce itself. It just lets you breathe. About 3 months after Christmas, my father called. I stared at the phone for a long time before answering. "Hello," I said. His voice sounded older, thinner. "Your mother's not well," he began. I closed my eyes. This was the script I knew. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "I hope she's okay." "She's been very upset," he continued. "She doesn't understand why you're doing this." "Doing what?" I asked. "Cutting us off." I exhaled slowly. I didn't cut anyone off. I closed a door you walked out of. Silence stretched between us. "We're your parents," he said finally. "We didn't raise you to abandon family." "No," I replied. "You raised me to abandon myself." He didn't respond. A week later, my sister emailed. Not a text, not a call, an email. Carefully formatted, emotionally distant. She wrote about forgiveness, about moving on, about how holding on to resentment only hurt everyone involved. She didn't mention my daughter once. I didn't reply. Months passed. I heard through extended family that things weren't going well. My parents sold their house. Retirement plans fell apart. My sister and her husband moved twice in 1 year. People whispered about money, about what could have been. I didn't correct them. The part that haunted them wasn't what they lost. It was how close they had come to choosing differently. One evening, my daughter asked, "Do I have to see Grandma again?" I knelt in front of her. "No," I said. "You never have to see anyone who makes you feel small." She nodded, relieved, and went back to drawing. I watched her for a long time, her pencil moving confidently across the page, unafraid to take up space. That was when I understood something I wish I'd learned earlier. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks. And you don't owe anyone a key just because they used to walk through freely. People like to believe that once you set a boundary, everything becomes clear. That peace arrives neatly packaged. That the moment you choose yourself, the world nods in understanding and moves on. That isn't how it works. What happens instead is quieter and more unsettling. The noise fades, yes, but in its place comes space. And in that space, you begin to notice how much of your life was built around managing other people's comfort. I had more time than I knew what to do with. Evenings without tension. Holidays without rehearsed smiles. Weekends without the low-level dread of saying the wrong thing or being perceived the wrong way. At first, it felt like standing in an empty room after furniture has been removed, echoing, unfamiliar, slightly disorienting. I kept reaching for my phone, half expecting a message that would require my emotional labor. An explanation. A defense. An apology. None came. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like grief. Not grief for my parents as they were, but for the parents I had spent my entire life hoping they might one day become. The versions of them I kept alive through patience and generosity and silence. Letting go of that hope was harder than letting go of them. My daughter adapted faster than I did. Children are experts at living in the present when the present feels safe. She made friends in the neighborhood within weeks. She laughed more, slept deeper. Her teachers commented on how confident she seemed, how willing she was to speak up. One afternoon, I overheard her telling another child, "It's okay if you don't like it. You can say no." I had to step into the kitchen so she wouldn't see me cry. I started therapy. Not because I was falling apart, but because I finally had the room to examine what had been holding me together. Session after session, I unpacked memories I'd never questioned. Patterns I'd normalized. Roles I'd played so well they'd begun to feel like identity. My therapist asked me once, "When did you learn that love was conditional?" I didn't have to think about it. "Early," I said. We talked about the concept of the designated stable one. The child who becomes emotionally self-sufficient too young. The one who doesn't cause trouble. Who absorbs dysfunction quietly so others don't have to. Families often reward that child, she said. But they don't protect them. That sentence stayed with me. Protection. Not affection. Not approval. Protection. The settlement money sat mostly untouched. People assume large sums change who you are. They imagine shopping sprees, dramatic transformations, a new personality unlocked by zeros. What it actually did was remove fear. I paid off the house, set up long-term savings, built a future that didn't depend on anyone's mood or generosity. I created a world where my daughter would never have to count peas to survive a dinner table. Sometimes, late at night, guilt crept in. Not about the money, but about the consequences. I wondered if I had been too final, too firm, if there had been another way that didn't end in distance. Then I remembered the look on my daughter's face when she slid out of her chair without a word. How ready she had been to leave. How practiced. That memory settled the question every time. About 6 months after Christmas, my mother sent a letter. Handwritten, carefully worded, full of sadness and confusion and the repeated phrase, "I don't understand." She wrote about family history, about how difficult things had been for her growing up, about sacrifices she'd made. She did not write about what she said at the table. She did not mention my daughter. At the end, she wrote, "I hope someday you'll see this differently. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Understanding does not require access. Forgiveness does not require proximity. Another truth I learned too late. But not too late for my child. Life settled into something almost ordinary. School drop-offs, packed lunches, evenings with homework spread across the kitchen table, movie nights, small arguments over bedtime, the kind of problems that mean nothing is actually wrong. On the anniversary of my husband's death, we visited the tree we'd planted. It had grown taller, stronger, roots deeper than I expected in such a short time. My daughter placed a small stone at its base. "For Dad," she said. We stood there quietly. "I think he'd be proud of you," I told her. "Of you, too," she said without hesitation. Children see clearly when they're not taught to doubt themselves. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room and thought about the word legacy. My parents believed legacy was obedience, continuity, tradition preserved at all costs. I was building something else, a lineage of safety, a future where love didn't have to be earned through erasure. I realized then that the most radical thing I had done wasn't tearing up envelopes or walking out on Christmas. It was ending a cycle without announcing it. No speeches, no ultimatums, no public spectacle beyond what others created themselves. Just a door closed quietly, firmly, and for good reason. People sometimes ask if I miss them. The honest answer is complicated. I miss the idea of family. I miss what could have been if kindness had been mutual instead of conditional. I don't miss who I had to be to belong, and that distinction matters more than anything. There's a strange myth people like to repeat when a story like mine ends. They say things like, "Money changed her," or "Success went to her head," or "She thinks she's better than everyone now." It's comforting for them. It keeps the math simple, because the truth that clarity changes you, that safety changes you, that no longer being desperate for approval changes you, is much harder to sit with. Money didn't turn me cold. It turned the volume down. It removed the static that had been blaring in my head my entire life, the constant calculation of how much I could give without being abandoned, how quiet I needed to be to remain acceptable, how much pain I could absorb before someone finally noticed. When that noise disappeared, what remained wasn't anger. It was stillness. Months turned into a year. Holidays came and went without drama. No forced dinners, no rehearsed smiles, no walking on emotional glass. On Christmas morning, my daughter and I made pancakes in pajamas. We stayed in the kitchen too long. We laughed when one burned. We watched movies we'd already seen and still quoted anyway. At some point, she looked up at me and said, "I like Christmas now." That sentence was worth more than any settlement. Every once in a while, someone would try to reopen the story. An aunt would reach out with concern masked as curiosity. An old family friend would ask if I'd softened yet. A distant cousin would suggest I regret things later if I didn't reconcile. I learned to respond with a single sentence. "We're doing well." That was all I owed anyone. The hardest part wasn't losing my family. It was accepting that I never really had the one I was mourning. I had proximity, obligation, roles, not protection, not safety. Not love that didn't come with conditions. Once I understood that, the grief changed shape. It stopped being a wound and became a scar, something I could trace without bleeding. I don't tell this story because I think I'm special. I tell it because I know how many people are sitting at tables just like that one. Forks in their hands, food going cold, children watching closely, people who have been taught that keeping the peace is the same as being loved. It isn't. Peace that requires your silence is not peace. Family that thrives on your self-erasure is not family. And boundaries that arrive only after someone hurts your child are not late, they're necessary. Sometimes people ask me if I ever think about what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd apologized, if I'd put the envelopes back together and pretended nothing happened. I do think about it. I think about my daughter learning to count peas instead of trusting her voice. I think about teaching her that cruelty is negotiable if it comes from familiar faces. I think about the cost of that lesson, and then I don't wonder anymore. Here's the part most people don't like to hear. I didn't win. They didn't lose. There was no scoreboard. There was only a choice. Stay quiet and be accepted, or be clear and be free. I chose free, not loudly, not perfectly, but completely. If you've watched this far, if this story made your chest tighten, or your stomach drop, or your mind flash to a moment you've never quite named, then you already know why I'm telling it. This isn't about me, it's about you. So here's the only question that actually matters. If you were sitting at that table, if your child was watching, if silence was the price of belonging, would you choose 1, protect yourself and the people who depend on you? Or 0, stay quiet and hope it gets better? Drop a 1 or a 0 inches the comments. No explanations required. And if stories like this make you pause for a moment longer than you expected, if they put words to something you've been carrying quietly, then you already know what to do next. Stay, listen, and remember, you are allowed to leave tables where you are not welcome. You are allowed to close doors without slamming them, and you are allowed to choose safety over familiarity. Always.